Naszym gościem jest Jimmy Burns, reportażysta, dziennikarz, pisarz, znany w Polsce z książki Barca, życie, pasja, ludzie. Dziś promujemy Piłkarską Furię, czyli opowieść o historii hiszpańskiego futbolu. Hi, I'm glad to meet you.
Hi, good to meet you.
Is it your first time in Warsaw?
It's my first time in Poland, yeah, I've just arrived, yeah.
The story you want to tell us about the Spanish national team and Spanish football starts with La Furia, through La Furia Española to La Roja. Is that an adequate and probably the shortest summary of your book?
Well, yes, it's an attempt to explain what happened that Spain, from being a kind of pretty unknown and unachieving football country in terms of its national team. It had never really won anything internationally with the exception of the European Nations Cup in the early 60s. It never won the World Cup, never won the Euros, except for the European Nations Cup in the 60s. How do you go from there to a national team that wins the European Championships and then goes on to win the World Cup and then win a second time the European Championship and really becomes probably the best national team in the history of football? And it's an attempt to explain how we go from one type of football to another.
It is said that Pep's team was the best team in the history of football. Do you agree with that?
Personally, I think yes, and I'm sure your viewers and listeners, there will be a lot of them that will agree with me. Simply not because of a biased, because I might be from Barca or I might not be from Barca, but because the times I have most enjoyed football as I call it poetry in motion, of a kind of extraordinary choreography of a team that plays with each other, that creates this extraordinary art form, which is beautiful to watch, but also very successful, entertaining football, dramatic football, the best football, has been the Guardiola years at Barca, and that of course had a huge impact on the national team, because you can't explain the success of La Roja in the Euro Championships and in the World Cup without understanding the influence of Guardiola and the Barca players.
Do you agree that Cristiano Ronaldo and Leo Messi era is slowly coming to an end? Ronaldo is become older and older. Don't you think that nowadays his biggest rivals, instead of Messi, are his own achievements, his own amazing records and statistics from the past?
I'm glad you've asked me about that, because my next book is actually going to be about, which I'm writing at the moment, which is being published first of all in English towards the end of the year, is about the rivalry between Messi and Ronaldo. And so it's a subject which at the moment I'm very obsessed with, because I've been traveling in Argentina and I've gone to Madeira and I've been talking to everyone about Messi and Ronaldo. It's a good question. I think there is an element, which is why I'm writing this book, that we're reaching an end of an extraordinary era, an unprecedented era of these two extraordinary football players. Never in the history of football, possibly never in the history of sport, have we had two individual sportsmen maintaining this level of competitiveness for such a long time. I mean, you just have to look this season, the goals that Messi is scoring. He's still scoring the same amount of goals as he was scoring 8 years ago. Ronaldo is still a central figure in Real Madrid, and he's over 30. This is an extraordinary phenomenon. Ronaldo, Portugal, with Ronaldo as captain, were European champions. I still think this is the great current rivalry of sport. It might be reaching an end of an era, but what gives it its dynamic is this sense of what you've noticed, which is they've got such a history that it's almost like they're being pursued by their own ghosts, by their own history. That they have to keep up, because everything can be downhill after this. When you got right up there, you can only go down. But we keep thinking, I mean, I thought 2 years ago that was the end of Messi. You know, when he was prosecuted for tax evasion, when he lost the Copa de America, when he said he would never again play for the Argentine national team, when he was depressed. And look at him, he came back. He came back, in fact, he grew his beard, looked like a Viking, came back fighting even more. Cristiano, you keep thinking he's going to be wiped out, but he keeps being rotated, and Zidane plays him very well. And he integrates very well with the rest of the Real Madrid team. And undoubtedly, they have a huge global following, which has no other rivals. And I think this is one of the great dramas in the entertaining sense of modern sport.
History of Spanish club football is full of success. On the contrary, La Roja became fully successful and fulfilled all the expectations just a decade ago. What was the reason for that?
Well, I think part of the reason is that for far too long, the monopoly of football and the way that the best managers came along and the way that players felt their commitment, the monopoly of that was at club level. It was the great rivalry, particularly of Real Madrid and Barca, and the national team was a kind of left as a kind of second category. I think what revolutionized that was the arrival of Luis Aragonés, 2007-2008, which he said, look, we can't have two types of football going on here. We can't have these two amazing clubs called Real Madrid and Barca playing fantastic football, and then we have a national team that doesn't perform, underachieves, and doesn't reproduce the kind of same level of football. So what does he do? He begins to bring in more Barca players, he brings in more Real Madrid players, and he begins to watch what is the best of each club. How can I bring it in like an alchemist in a laboratory? How do I bring all this together and reproduce the best of those clubs at national level? And there you had the phenomenon of La Roja at its best, which brings in Johan Cruyff. It brings in the lessons of Johan Cruyff, the lessons of Guardiola, the best of Iniesta, the best of Xavi Hernandez, the best of, let's not forget the Real Madrid players, Ramos, people like Ramos, a fantastic defender who plays very well alongside Piqué. Two rivals at club level, but Vicente del Bosque managed to make them friends, which is a fantastic thing because it was a wonderful winning formula to have Piqué and Ramos, these great two big captains, strong personalities, you know, getting on very well together. And that's the secret of La Roja, you know, and we go from an underperforming national team to a much more technical, creative, stylish national team. When, you know, and I see that in the Polish version, the Furia comes in. The Furia was the Franco's concept that the way to play football was to play like a bullfight. You go in and you kick people to death, and you play like the British used to, and you've got to be very, very strong and violent. Don't worry about art, don't worry about creativity, don't worry about choreography or poetry. And that, of course, won some games, but it didn't win any games. And what you had with La Roja is a much more artistic, creative, passing, possession game, free-flowing, all the things that we know, which was Barca at its best and the Spanish national team at its best, which we have to say, unfortunately, a lot of other clubs have started to follow, and they've unlocked the secret, particularly the Germans and the German national team, but not everyone. And I think Spain has to be one of the favourites for Russia World Cup.
Can you imagine Real Madrid without Barcelona and Barca without Real?
Absolutely not. The world would cease to exist. I mean, not just football, but I think the world would cease to. Can you imagine it? Can any of your viewers and listeners imagine it? Absolutely not. I mean, the world would be much more boring. I think probably the world would collapse. I mean, those of us who love football, the idea of not having the rivalry between Real Madrid and Barca, I mean, you know, for me, the great games in my season are the clásicos. You know, I mean, look at the players that you have playing for them. I mean, you know, you have Ronaldo, Messi, Iniesta, you know, Ramos. You have Morata, the youngies coming up. You have an extraordinary range of real talent, all in one game. Fantastic. It's a real privilege.